unprecedented change on the bulk power system, and resource mix is one of those challenges. So this next session, we'll be talking about how that impacts you, and we've got a panel discussion. Molly Elliott is going to facilitate this round. Michael Newcomer with WEC, Michael Vallejos, did I say it right? Vlahos. Gosh, I'll get that right one of these days. And Tyler Whiting. So go ahead.
Thanks. So I know some of us are still kind of dribbling in. So we're going to start with a Slido just to find out who is in our audience today. So if you don't mind pulling out your phones and letting us know how you use third parties for various needs. And we're using the word third parties and the word contractors here today. We're intentionally trying to avoid the word vendors because we are going to be a lot broader than that SIP definition or guidance on the term vendors. I know a lot of us feel a lot more comfortable with definitions. We are, after all, compliance personnel and engineers. And how many times did Josh use the word vendors yesterday? 7, 8. I'm not really. I'm sorry. How many times did he use the word definition, right? But what we're looking for today, you'll notice that on this poll, we've kind of tried to skew it a little bit towards services. So it could be a product vendor that we're talking about, but only if they provide ongoing services to you for the type of risk that we're talking about today. Another category that you might want to consider would be other registered entities that provide services to you that are not under a CFR agreement or not under their NERC functional registration. And do I need to, we have 34 responses now, so there we go. Now I see them coming through. So it sounds like a lot of you are using third parties for compliance compliance management, operations, and maintenance. Fewer on the cyber or physical security side. And only about 7% of you right now, it shows, are not using contractors. Keep in mind, I know that we have contractors in the audience today, but even our contractors might be using contractors, right? So don't feel like you have to hit none if you are a contractor. Okay, I think we're pretty stable here. Kim gave us all an introduction, but I think what she didn't tell us is what as much as what our background is. So I'm in the oversight planning group at WEC. Michael?
Yeah, I'm a O&P staff auditor in the medium inherent pod at WEC.
I'm a staff attorney with the enforcement team. Been with WEC for about 1.5 years now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tyler Whiting. I'm with the Low Inherent Risk Group, and I'm a cybersecurity auditor. Background, about 10 years with WEC, 7 of those as an auditor. I've been on, I think, probably over 100 monitoring engagements and about, I'd say around 30 site visits. So just happy to be here. I think this is a topic that we need to be talking more about that we're not. So I think this is good. Looking forward to the discussions.
And Tyler, that was a great segue. So my colleagues here, they have backgrounds in auditing and enforcement. And so they've seen some of the successes and failures of contractor management. But this is really an emerging topic that we're starting to talk about. And we know that you as entities have a lot more experience with this than we do. So we're going to do something just a little different this morning. We're going to turn this panel discussion into a little bit of a roundtable. So we're going to have an opportunity for you to get up at the mic and share some of your best practices a little later on. We're also going to have a whole lot of Slidos in here so that our virtual audience can participate. But if you're in the virtual audience and you want to participate in sort of the open mic, we're not going to be able to let you participate in the open mic, but if you enter your responses in Whova, everybody will be able to see them. So not in the WebEx chat, because that's going to be limited to people who are on WebEx. But if you use the Whova chat, you can definitely share some best practices with your peers who are here today. The only guideline that we really want to ask is, we know that there are contractors in our midst today. We know that we don't want to turn this into either recommending a specific contractor or airing our grievances, right? So let's not name names today. If you want to talk to your peers about that privately, feel free to do so, but that's not something we're going to do in this session. So Michael, I'm going to start with you. Why does WEC even care about contractor relationships?
Yes, thank you, Molly. So contractor management may not be in the standards, but it does have a direct impact on the success or failure for an entity to manage their risks. It's a new reality. In the old days, a lot of utilities were large operations, but with the emergence of smaller generation entities, most utilities will deem that it's more fiscally responsible to have contractors as opposed to in-house expertise for everything. So as a WEC auditor, part of my role is to assist entities identifying those risks associated with the BES. And currently we are seeing a lot more contractor-related risks.
Thanks. And Tyler, I know that a lot fewer people out there responded with cyber and physical security as one of their areas, but are you seeing the same thing on the cyber and physical side?
Yeah, I definitely say we're seeing the same things. A definite rise in contractors. You know, with the low inherent risk group hasn't been around for very long. I think we made those changes a couple years ago. So my first visit to a solar farm was maybe 2 years ago, and it was kind of interesting showing up at the site. We had 3 entities there. We had the owner, the GO, we had an O&M provider, so an operations and management provider, and then we had the third-party compliance consultant. So it was kind of threw me for a loop at first, but after a few visits, I got used to it, and now it's just normal. But all that to say is, for the low inherent risk entities, the majority of IBR, GOPs, they're contracting out a lot of their operation. Just a lot of their program is contracted out. And that's kind of the reality that we're living in today. So yeah, but I think I maybe push back a little bit on something that Michael said. We can do that. We're auditors. We like to push back a little bit. But he said that contractor relationship just isn't in the standards. The standards are pretty silent. From a SIP perspective, I don't think it's completely silent when it comes to contractors and vendors. We have SIP 13, right? That's been in place since 2020. That's a supply chain risk management. You also have with SIP 13 comes requirements in SIP 5, SIP 10. Next April, we're seeing a change in the next version of SIP 3 that's coming down the pipeline pretty quick, dealing with vendor electronic access. So it's sprinkled in the SIP standards, but I think the difference with what's called out in the SIP standards and what we're talking about today is, with the SIP standards, when they're talking about vendors, it's all about managing the risk, mitigating the risk. But what we're talking about here, right, is relationships with your contractors. So I think that can be one component of managing the risk, right? One control could be strengthening those relationships. So I'll just throw that out there.
Thanks, Tyler. Before we move to the next slide, I just wanted to point out some of the statistics on this slide, right? Michael spoke a little bit to the quantity of smaller entities that we have at WEC. And one of the things we're seeing in entity registration right now is that the GOPs, where they're either GOPs only, or a combination of the two, are making up 2/3 of our registrations right now. So these are the entities that are not vertically integrated, would be low inherent risk entities. And we're seeing a lot of that right now, which is probably why we're also seeing an increase in the need for the contractor management, because these are the entities that are relying on, they're relying very heavily on contractors. But Mike, we have some other statistics here on the enforcement side. Unfortunately, you get to see the failures more than the successes, but what are you seeing on the enforcement side?
So about 77% of WEX entities are considered low inherent risk. But those same entities account for about 1/3 of our PNCs. And if you look at just the O&P standards, it's 45%, which on the surface, that sounds good. But then you realize these entities have maybe less complex operations, fewer assets, and fewer standards to keep up with. So a pretty high percentage of PNCs related to their operations.
And these aren't our 3-year ROP entities, right? So we're not auditing them every 3 years.
Correct. About 25% of those PNCs were found by WEC at audit. The remainder were self-reported, and it's pretty common for the low inherent risk entities to self-report as a result of an internal audit they did to ensure compliance with standards.
So again, contractors, while they may be mentioned in a few standards, but they're becoming more and more of an underlying risk for noncompliance, is what you're saying.
Yes, from an enforcement perspective, hiring contractors is definitely a good thing, but you can't just pay them and forget about it. Outsourcing can reduce risk for an entity in certain areas, but it also comes with a different set of risks that we'll talk about later. You can delegate authority as an entity, but not responsibility. Ultimately, the entity is responsible for being in compliance with the NERC standards. And it doesn't make sense to do it all in reality. Sometimes the best practice is to hire a third party, and a lot of registered entities don't have the resources to not reach out to third parties and have them help out with compliance.
Okay, so we have another Slido for the audience now. We're looking to see, other than just your general compliance program, right? Because I don't want to see a lot of all standards up there, but in general, what areas, what standards specifically are you contracting out some of those activities? And this should be a word cloud. So it looks like we're getting, yes. SIP 3 and SIP 6. On SIP 3, that's a pretty broad category. So are you contracting out all of SIP 3, SIP 3R2, or maybe are there specific areas? I know, Tyler, you have seen some of the low inherent risk contracting, right? What areas are you seeing within SIP 3?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, SIP 3 should rightfully be pretty big in that word cloud. SIP 6, not surprised to see that one there. So, I mean, when we're talking about low inherent risk entities, right? SIP 2, SIP 3 are the ones that are applicable. For your medium inherent risk, right? Potentially all of the SIP standards could be applicable. But I will say that we have seen contractors pretty much almost for every standard out there in the SIP standard suite of standards. So think SIP 4, right? Your personnel risk assessments, your background checks. We've seen companies do that. SIP 5, we've seen IT management companies managing firewall switches, routers. Even pen testing, right? That's not in the standards. We've seen third parties do that. SIP 6, you're looking at security guards, your fences, gates. SIP 7, patch management. There's lots of vendors out there for patch management. SIP 8, I think we've seen mostly in-house for SIP 8. That's kind of a homegrown thing, but I have seen contractors or mostly parent companies or third party compliance companies performing SIP-8s. You think about your cloud solutions, right? Your backup and recovery, SIP-9, BCSI, SIP-11, and then right for SIP-14, you have it written in the standard. You're unaffiliated third-party reviewers. So I think it's pretty much all across the SIP standards is what we've seen.
And Michael, you're probably not surprised to see PRC 5, PRC 19, and the mod standards come up there.
Yes, Molly. For the O&P side of things, we're seeing the majority of small GOP outsourcing standards that require specialized studies, test equipment, and engineering expertise that most generator-only or generator-operator-only entities just don't maintain in-house. So yes, like we can see here on the slide, most of mod 25, 26, 27, and some of the PRCs such as 5, 19, 24, and 25 are fairly common to see.
And we see PRC 28, 29, and 30 in small letters there. Somebody's getting ahead of the game. That's great.
Yes, it is a good reminder that those standards are coming into effect next year.
Molly, can I do a quick kind of read of the room, kind of a pulse check? How many here are medium inherent risk entities? Just raise your hand. Okay. How many are small inherent risk entities? Okay. What about my vendors out there? How many of you are vendors? Sorry, contractors, Molly. I can't get the vendor out of my mind. It's all synonymous. It says supply chain, third party, vendor, contractor. It all means the same to me, but okay. Good. Any OEMs in the audience? I don't see any. Okay. Sorry, back to you, Molly.
No, that's great. Thanks, Taylor. So we have a Slido again. What benefits have you seen from outsourcing? And this is where we're really asking the question of why do you outsource, right? All but 7% of you were using contractors at the beginning here, you said. So there must be a benefit. Expertise and perspective are coming up a lot here, Michael. I think that you've said you were seeing that as well, right?
Yes, so it's from what we can see that a lot of entities are using third-party compliance or O&M providers to leverage specialized expertise that enhance their compliance effectiveness compared to small in-house only models. Additionally, contractors can scale up their services to meet an entity's needs and to support growth or new technologies or additional registered functions as they develop. So there's a lot of flexibility there. Quality external providers also can provide best practices to help prevent organizational stagnation. So I think we've seen that here in the Slido quite a bit.
Sleep at night. Yeah.
Sleep at night. So additionally, I'll just say that outsourcing can also be, cost effective. Certain requirements such as the mod testing do require highly specialized skills and equipment, and they're not necessarily performed year round. So it doesn't always make sense unless your operation can manage it to have that in-house expertise and that equipment year round. So if you're only performing those mod testing once every 3, 5, however many years, it's definitely more fiscally responsible to outsource it.
Now, Tyler, you recently went on a series of 5 site visits to low impact entities and
Yeah.
were able to observe some of this in person.
Yeah, that was interesting. Before I jump into that, I just want to talk a little bit about quality assurance, I saw one person put QA/QC there on the Slido. So whoever that was, come find me after. I'll give you a candy bar or something. I'll do what Josh did yesterday. But I think from my perspective, the biggest benefit is quality assurance. If someone is going to be reviewing my work, you better believe I'm going to put a little bit more, more time in making sure that it's a quality product, that everything is accurate. And the same goes with vendors, right? If a vendor, contractor, knows that you as an entity is going to come behind them, put a second set of eyes on their work, then they're going to deliver a good product to you. And so I'd agree from that standpoint of quality assurance. And I think that kind of plays into my story about the 5 entities we saw earlier this year. So it was a monitoring engagement. I believe there were spot checks here in California, middle of nowhere, California. That's where the generation is, right? But we saw 5 entities across 3 days. So it was pretty quick. Something new that we hadn't tried before. These were GOPs. 3 of the entities were IBRs, solar for the most part. One was a hybrid solar battery. The 4th one was a geothermal. The 5th one was a natural gas. It was interesting to see which ones contracted out most of their programs and which ones didn't. So the 3 IBRs, they each had an O&M provider. They each had a third-party compliance consultant. So when we showed up on site, the 3 entities were there. But the geothermal they had one compliance consultant, but no O&M provider. And then the natural gas, everything was in-house. So kind of everything along the spectrum there, from everything in-house to pretty much fully contract or outsourcing. Guess who kind of fared the best during those visits? It was the IBRs. And I think that was interesting. And I think we can, at least me personally, I can attribute that to the quality assurance that was going on between the O&M provider and the compliance consultant and the entity, right? You had some QA/QC controls in place there. There wasn't, there wasn't a hands-off approach taken when it came to that relationship with the contractors. When you're on site as an auditor, you can get a sense of these things with reading the body language and just the interactions between the different parties. And I could tell with the IBR entities that was happening. Communication was happening, and really they just had established that level of trust to where everything went pretty smooth during the engagement. That's something that I didn't quite see with the other 2 entities. Now, I don't think we can draw any conclusions from that, right? I don't think we can extrapolate the results of that across the entire Western interconnection. We're talking about 5 entities versus hundreds, right? And I'm not trying to say that all IBRs are going to have the same experience, if you will. But I do think it was kind of an interesting glimpse and flavor into what's happening on the ground out in the wild there in the field. Something that maybe we can all take away from that is, what are you doing to increase your relationship with your vendors? Do you have a standing meeting with them that happens on a regular basis? How often are you communicating? Things like that, just food for thought.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Okay, we're moving to our first audience participation. So if you want to hop up to a mic if you're in the room, or if you want to add some comments into the Whova app to share with your peers, we want to know, how do you establish a successful contractor relationship from the beginning? So how do you set that tone, establish common goals from the very start?
It's Josh. I'm with SMUD, Sacramento Municipal Utility District. One of the things that came to mind for me for this was just during the vetting process. Well, we're a municipal utility, so all of our bids are public, and we can publish our security requirements kind of up front. So I'm on the cybersecurity side, so that's where my mind goes with this. But we have a process we call conditional authorization to use. Maybe you guys have some of that. But part of that involves a vendor risk questionnaire. So we have like 65 questions that we ask a vendor. How do you conduct remote access? Who has access to the physical and cyber assets that would involve SMUD data? How do you vet your contractors, your vendors, right? And so going into detail on all those different areas, and you can quickly see the ones that have thought this through versus the ones that are just sort of answering the questions. So we found that that's helpful in establishing a successful and a secure contractor relationship.
Thank you, Josh. Just quick follow-up question for you on that. Is that the NATF questionnaire?
No, it's actually one that we've developed in-house. We may have used some other questionnaires, maybe the NATF one. I'm not exactly positive on that, but it's one that we've developed over many years and continue to mature and grow.
Great, awesome.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. You know, some feedback that we've gotten from entities in the past is with questionnaires like that they don't feel like they have the leverage that they need to have a contractor fill that out and give it back to them. So it's good to hear that. And I'm not sure if that's the case that you saw that at SMUD or not, but hopefully that's changing and you're getting good risk information back now.
We can definitely require it. We have a public bid process. We can kind of set the rules. If you want to play, if you want to be considered, you have to do X, Y, and Z. And this is one of the things they have to do. So
good to hear. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Jared Cody from Platte River Power Authority. And to kind of build off of what Josh was saying, one of the things that we do as well, obviously we have the contract process. Our vendors, our contractors go through this process. But a lot of the people who are actually doing the work that are coming on site, they haven't read the contract, right? Like they're not familiar with those details. And so what we do at Platte River is, you know, we almost have like an orientation for those contractors, like specifically for like our physical security. We have guards. And so when those guards actually come on site, before they're actually able to operate the systems, we have training sessions for those individuals. And because there's a lot of turnover in that space, there's ongoing training. There's also training for the project managers of the contract to come in. I believe we have a quarterly schedule for them to where they come in, they get refresher courses. That way we can ensure that the people that we actually have staffed from a contractor perspective, they understand what our expectations are. And I think from a relationship perspective, it eliminates that additional work that we have to do to go back and fix mistakes. And I think for the people actually doing the work, the contractors themselves, I think they appreciate knowing kind of what those boundaries are, what those expectations are. And it's led to some really positive relationships at Platte River.
Awesome. Thank you, Jared. Ongoing training, that's a good one.
Hey, Hashir Ahmed, AES Renewables. We are an IBR developers. So one of the things that we do during execution of our new projects for the EPC contractors is that during the RFP phase, we would discuss the NERC and any other requirements with the contractors, all of them, and make sure that our expectations are clear. We have in-house templates that we give to them so they can all be consistent, because for different projects, we have different EPC contractors. We have contracts with the vendors. Sorry, Molly, but these are like the, OEMs, wind turbine manufacturers, inverter vendors. So again, we discuss everything beforehand during the RFP phase and make the expectations clear, even in the operational time frame of the projects. If there's any firmware updates that the vendors want to do, they need to inform us first, because a lot of times that can change the way your plant reacts. So that establishing all the the needs beforehand is what we would highly recommend, and that's worked well for us.
Thanks. Did we get any comments online?
Not at this time.
Okay, we'll go to the next slide then. Maybe. There we go. So it's a Slido, and now we're going to talk about challenges. I'm sure there are a lot of challenges to outsourcing in addition to the benefits. So go ahead and let us know what challenges you are encountering.
Yeah, I'm interested about this one, Molly. We don't hear a whole lot of these when we're at audit, so.
Right.
Yeah, at least for contractors.
So these can be anonymous if you want, right? Consultant bait and switch expert for newbie. I'm not in.
Lead time's a big one.
Yeah, lead time is a big one. Lack of accountability, things take longer.
Yeah, timing issues are definitely something that we see on the enforcement end, where an entity has outsourced something to a third party and various reasons for delay, whether they didn't start early enough to get something done. If there's equipment delays, we've definitely seen timing result in non-compliances for entities.
It's interesting that cost showed up both on the benefit and on the challenges. Poaching our internal experts.
That happens everywhere, though.
Yeah. I think coordination is a big one that we talked about on the team as well. Coordination between, I mean, when you have multiple individuals with different incentives that can lead to some coordination issues. Yeah, we'll go ahead and go on. So, Mike, you brought up the topic of different sets of risks early on in our conversation. That, of course, using contractors is not a bad thing. It can be a very good thing, but there are some additional risks to consider. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the third party isn't accountable from a compliance perspective. The entities are still the ones obligated to comply with NERC standards. Some of the things that we've seen is evidence management. If you don't have the evidence, you don't know if it happened. If you don't have the test results, did you actually do the test? We've seen issues with PRC 5 where there were no post-commissioning records available for review or use as compliance evidence. So the entity couldn't show that they had compliance with the standard and also couldn't determine if the maintenance activities were actually done. Another risk or pitfall is having blind trust. Just because you're using a well-known third party, it doesn't necessarily mean that the result will meet compliance. And there might be additional labor or expertise needed on the entity's part to ensure that you are staying compliant with the standard. I've seen a PRC 24 compliance study that was done. The study showed compliance with R1, but not R2. The entity didn't properly read the report and filed self-reports for PNCs for both of them. So ultimately, in this situation, the R1 was compliant and it resulted in a dismissal. But it's important that the inverse doesn't happen, that you think you are in compliance when you're actually not. And don't self-report those and don't make those corrections that are needed. Other things we've seen, a different PRC 24 came from an erroneous understanding of a third-party consultant on equipment limitations. The entity relied on that third party, didn't wait for confirmation from the OEM, and ultimately they were not in compliance because they assumed that there were equipment limitations that there actually wasn't. And another thing to mention, at the beginning of the conference yesterday, Steve Noss mentioned the recent FERC order and the involvement of an audit consultant in those violations. I'm going to read exactly what the FERC order said. I don't want to get it wrong.
Because Mike's a lawyer.
FERC found the audit consultant involved himself in the submission of false, inaccurate, and misleading information to WEC and the concealment of relevant information from WEC. Their guidance was inconsistent with the obligation of third-party consulting firms to advise and guide NERC members to provide only truthful, accurate, and complete responses during NERC and regional entity audits. That sounds scary. And while there are new risk considerations with outsourcing, something like this happened with the knowledge of the registered entity. It wasn't just the third party that was doing things incorrectly. And like Steve mentioned, hopefully it's not a common occurrence, that it was a one-off. But it is important to set the tone from the top down. Entities should be demanding candor and integrity from not just their staff, but also all third parties that they use for assistance.
Thanks, Tyler. I think you wanted to talk a little about some cyber and physical risks that you've seen.
Of course, yeah, my favorite topic. I think when it comes to cyber and physical, a lot of the risk falls on access, right? If you think about the FERC report, what was that? That was an access issue. And I don't think it necessarily it's a new risk, but I think from a contractor perspective, maybe it could be framed in a different way. You know, with more contractors comes more people who are accessing your site or your systems that you may or may not know very well. From a low inherent risk perspective, it's not required in the standards that you have to perform a background check on them. Are your contractors performing background checks on their employees? Are they providing those to you as an entity? What kind of assurance are you getting from them in that regard? So some of the questions that I would be asking myself if I was an entity from a controls perspective, how do I know who is accessing my site, when they are accessing, and for how long? How do I know my firewall rules are appropriate and needed? How do I know if a transient cyber asset or removable media has been plugged in? You know, what are the controls you have in place to bring you those assurances? So I think also from another perspective, another risk perspective is software and hardware. You know, I was at a recent audit, and this was a small entity, bless you, and it was a wind farm. We were looking at a network diagram, and I noticed that the SCADA vendor had a separate rack with their devices separate from the entity's SCADA rack. And I noticed that the OEM vendor had some end-of-life devices in that rack. So I asked about that in interview, and the response I got back from the entity was, well, those devices are sitting behind our next gen firewall, which great, right? That's an excellent control. But with all controls, right, they can be circumvented in certain situations, right? So if I know the risk is very small, but if, say, someone was on site and plugged directly into the devices, that would be one example of circumventing the firewall. And so just, I guess, you know, from an end-of-life equipment standpoint, I know there's going to be differences in opinion between an entity and contractors. But I guess what I would say is keep, the Swiss cheese model, right? Where you got your stack of Swiss cheese. Phasing out end-of-life devices is like adding another slice of cheese in there to try and plug up that hole where someone could potentially exploit a vulnerability. And so just ensuring that you have multiple controls in place, have those crucial conversations with your contractors. And I know you can't force them to upgrade their devices, but from a good cyber hygiene perspective, there's situations like that where, and I'd be curious if anyone writes this stuff in their contracts, right? Their service level agreements, make sure you have up-to-date hardware and software. So I'd be curious from some perspective for that. So find me after, whoever's got the answer to that one.
Michael, you have some operational perspective as well.
Yeah, so the bulk electric system is a giant machine, and we're all working together to keep it moving. And so communication is kind of a running theme along a lot of these risks. And when you don't have strong communication that's maintained between a contractor and the entity's internal SMEs, critical information can be lost. So without clear coordination, contractors can lack operational understanding of needed equipment and operational issues. For example, a protective relay malfunction could result in a line being taken out of service. If communication channels are unclear, identifying the correct replacement of equipment or coordinating restoration could take longer, which creates both operational delays and potential BES reliability impacts. Additionally, weak communication or oversight can lead to compliance gaps. I had an audit, one of my first audits here at WEC, where I was working with a small utility, and they had contracted out their PRC5 maintenance. And, in an interview, after reviewing all their PRC5 maintenance reports, one of the PRC5 records for this relay literally said that, and it had, red text and everything, that it failed its tests, and that the technician recommended a replacement. And so this was a backup relay. So it wasn't necessarily crucial to get it replaced immediately for this entity. But the problem was that this record was dated a year and a half prior to discovery. And so I'm not sure exactly what the issue there was, but obviously there was not a review process. They didn't have an internal SME that understood the test reports. And, there was some poor communication there.
Thanks. We're going to turn it back over to you to let us know. So in that ongoing relationship, our first question had to do more with establishing the relationship. But now that you have a contractor that you're using, what management practices, what controls have worked well for you in maintaining that ongoing relationship, the communication, and so forth? Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, it's Jared Cody again from Platte River. So this particular area is a really good topic. So we at Platte River, we use an internal control for contractor onboarding. It's a pretty good workflow. But one of the things that we have been really mindful of is, with an internal control, we can't set it and forget it, right? Like we have to go back, we have to review the workflows to make sure that they are staying up with the standard, staying up with our expectations. And that's just one of the things that has worked well for us. I think it's something that, we have some really knowledgeable people who set up these controls. But again, as time goes on, a lot of those people who set up those controls leave, they move to different positions. And so for this particular section, I would definitely recommend just be mindful of those workflows, make sure that you're training on what those workflows are. In the event that the workflow breaks, if the control breaks, what is your internal control to your internal control? And so that would be what I would provide to this group. Thank you.
Thank you.
It is so important to keep an eye on your internal controls to make sure that they haven't changed and that everybody's aware when there are changes.
Yeah, I like the internal control to your internal
Yeah.
control piece. Thanks, Jared. I set my alarm. My wife sets her alarm. Our kids come wake us up, but some days all three fail.
Yes.
So.
Get a cat. I have a cat that has no problem waking me up in the morning. Anyone else have successes that they want to report? They want to share with their peers?
All right, I can chime in.
Awesome.
Leland.
So awesome. So yeah, so okay, us small generators, we're maybe a little bit different from some of the other folks, but like, what we've done that's kind of worked well is a couple of things. One, so like proactively, like internal controls, we like include, vendors, as part of the team. So they're, on meetings with us, they receive PMs. They're essentially, an employee. They're part of our team. So that helps. You can't, you have to limit that a little bit, right? But I mean, like if they're empowered with knowledge and our tools, and they're more likely to follow our practices. Similarly, I think like vendors and contractors, they want to comply with NERC standards, but they really don't know them, right? So like they've actually enjoyed learning through the process, I guess, because they know about NERC compliance, but it's just like this vague thing that they don't understand that they want to be part of. So we kind of inform them. We'll look, PRC5 testing, for example. We sent them exact scope, because like a lot of these plants, like ever since it was built in 1990, they've been doing the same thing, but they're missing devices, maybe they're testing the relays, but not all the control circuits. So like we send them like a list, like here's the 86 things that you're going to provide evidence for. And oh, by the way, we're going to review and comment on their report. And they're just like shocked by that, but then once we kind of get them trained up, it works pretty well. So they come to expect that, and they want to see our comments, and then, mysteriously enough, their reports start looking like our reports, so like, the industry kind of learns from each other, right? So like, I think it takes two to tango. So if, if you treat them not like contractors, but like teammates, that's been working well for us. Similarly, like on the transient cyber assets and removable media, we asked a vendor for, their scan evidence, and they said, oh, we don't provide that. We said, we don't release the PO until you do. They decided to play ball. Anyways, that's what I've done.
Thanks. Did we have any responses online for this one?
Not at this time.
Okay, so we're gonna finish up with the controls that WEC has seen to manage risks from outsourcing. I think we've alluded to some of those. Mike, I know you usually see failures, but you do see mitigation plans as well. So can you tell us some of the things that you've seen?
Yeah, being in enforcement, I typically see the controls that an entity will put in place after something has been missed or a process failed. And while the third parties are often the SMEs, the registered entities, like I said before, they still need to retain knowledgeable staff to ensure the work is complete and adequate after they get test results. We had an entity file a PRC 24 self-report, and we later determined the non-compliance actually extended back to the commissioning date. The original compliance report that was completed when the site was commissioned showed that the R2 settings had failed, but the entity didn't actually have any internal controls to ensure settings were changes, or the settings were identified and made. So what they did, they implemented a new internal document with milestones for review, and not just of PRC 24, but all NERC new and revised standards, and also went to compliance software. So they would have a higher visibility into the compliance status. So once they see something has failed, they know they need to do something about it. We've also seen many PNCs regarding Mod 26 due to unexpected delays. One entity decided to put in a 1-year buffer. They don't know what's going to happen, so they're going to get started a year earlier than they were previously to overcome those. Another added a NERC compliance department whose sole role was to monitor the compliance management activities of third-party consultants. So they have a specific person, probably multiple people dedicated to managing those relationships with third parties. We've also seen incorrect relays due to the contractors being given incorrect information on the configuration that they needed. One of the entities simplified the settings input template that was originally incorrect. Another entity added a checklist where 2 of their SMEs had to review before giving that information to the contractors. So these instances fell on the entity for providing incorrect information. So you could have controls on the front end, make sure that you're doing what you need to do and the information that you give your contractors is correct, not just putting in controls to make sure you do the steps necessary once you get reports from your contractors.
Great. And Tyler, you've seen some of the monitoring side, right? So the positive things?
Yes, when we're talking about controls to manage risk from outsourcing, some things we've seen entities take the stance of we're not going to allow third-party TCA connections or RM. We're going to use our own entity owned and managed devices with that. And I'm not sure if that's I guess that's kind of falls in the trust arena there, but a lot of entities just take a policy stance. We're not going to connect TCRM at all. Now, that's not always feasible, right? At some of these control houses and substations, but that's what we've seen. For an electronic access perspective, we see a lot of deployments of the next generation firewalls with really awesome capabilities as far as intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, and we also see firewall rule reviews being performed on a quarterly or sometimes monthly basis instead of an annual basis, just more frequently to make sure nothing falls between the cracks, that you don't have any rules hanging out there that are just outdated or they were a temporary rule but no longer used, things like that. From a physical perspective, we see a lot of visitor management programs not required in low inherent risk for low impact, but nonetheless, escorts, cameras, both inside, outside of the control buildings, and access points. So a lot of that's what I've been seeing, basically. Yeah.
And Michael?
Yeah. So entities that are proactive, can benefit from being proactive. So if you have, new standards and requirements that you see that maybe need to be contracted out for, just keep in mind that other entities might be contracting out for those same things. And if there's a limited pool of contractors that can handle that specific expertise, that's something to consider. So another thing that could benefit is long-term agreements can help contractors build more familiarity with the entity system. Reducing onboarding costs is another benefit to those longer-term agreements. They can also provide stability for the compliance programs to ensure consistent testing, reliable evidence, and a deeper system knowledge. For standards like PRC5, consistent contractors can help you support a uniform testing methodology as well as documentation. While for your mod standards, you might be promoting more reliable data and consistent data collection, and it will have better historical performance trends that you can monitor. So additionally, some issues if you have frequent contractor changes, it can introduce some additional risks. So contracts should emphasize training, customization, and clear communication expectations to prevent, generic cookie cutter procedures. I think Josh kind of hit on it yesterday, but your procedures should be built to your specific operational needs, and it should be something that somebody can pick up and use, and it should be more of a living template. So to manage outsourcing risks, entities should maintain strong controls, make sure you're reviewing all the contractors related evidence. You can also maybe think about doing third-party audits on the contractor's work, just to make sure that, a specific contractor isn't maybe falsifying evidence or something. I don't know, but clearly defined scope, deliverables, deadlines, ideally with compliance and legal review. You could also consider rotating contractors, just depending on your operational needs. And that can help maybe check against fraud or poor performance, and ensure all procedures are tailored to the specific system and your reliability functions.
Thanks. Now I know that we titled this contractor relationship management, and I think relationship is really key to what we're talking about today. And Tyler, you had a recent audit experience, I believe, where you had a contractor participate in it, right? And you saw a very strong relationship.
I did, yeah, and I'll just say relationships. Back to what Leland said, right? They're two-way streets. They're built off of mutual trust, respect, communication. I'm sure I can go on and on there, but I think a key to that is the communication piece. So with my experience that I had not long ago at audit, it was kind of a situation that we're not in very often. It was a low inherent risk entity with low impact control centers. And so that was kind of interesting in and of itself, but they had outsourced all of their networking to a reputable third party. And we were trying to get the firewall configs loaded into NPView, tried and couldn't get it to go figure with that one. But what we did to get around it was we wanted to do a demonstration, just a virtual demonstration of the firewall policy. And so we brought that up with the entity. The entity was like, sure, no problem, whatever you need. And if there's anything an auditor likes to hear is that phrase right there, sure, no problem. So a few days later, we hopped on a call, pretty quick turnaround, but I've never seen a vendor SME that comfortable, navigating a firewall policy. And originally it was just going to be a review of screenshots, right? But when we got on the call, he was really quick to say, well, I'll just show you the live system. And we hopped right in, looked at about 5 to 6 firewalls, skimming through the rules. He was at ease, very transparent. We drilled into some rules that we had more questions about. And I mean, to make a baseball reference, any baseball fans out there, but this was like a perfect game, this interview, this demonstration. I think I came out of that just getting a real sense of, wow, this relationship between that vendor and that entity was top notch, right? There was trust there to put a vendor SME in front of auditors performing a live demonstration of their crown jewels to access, right? Their firewall policy. So I tell that story. I mean, it's a success story, but I have no doubt that these successes are happening all across the Western interconnection. And it just, I came away with that feeling really encouraged and really getting the sense that we are coming together, right? As an industry, as vendors, we all have the same goal here, right? Why are we here today? It's all about reliability and security of the Western interconnection. And we're doing that together. We're working together. So I just want to, I guess, I kind of close up all my site visits with thanking the entity. I'd like to thank everyone in attendance here today, both online and as well in person, both vendors and entities. You are, right, you are performing critical life-saving work for the grid, and the grid is so much more secure for that. So thank you. Back to you, Molly.
No, I think that's perfect, Tyler. And I know you're going to be disappointed, but we're down to 2 minutes for questions. So if anyone has a burning question, hop on up to that mic. But we can only take a couple.
And my stomach just growled.
Yeah. Okay, we do
What?
have a question.
Right, or is it Jenny?
I promise I'm not getting paid for asking questions.
Yes.
But if
Okay.
you go to the next slide, my Venmo account is there and I can ask questions on your behalf. So I was hoping that you can provide some thoughts generally on the NERC alert, which was issued a few months ago about remote access, right? And specifically on how do you as auditors see remote access from SIP 3 Section 6, especially when the vendors, like in their case, are having accounts within the systems. Are they vendors now? Or if they use, let's assume, an intermediate system to jump in, is that remote access? And how do you assess the situation? How do we, in terms of making sure that we have the risk and the internet controls assessed properly, but also make sure that we show compliance?
Yeah, that's a great question, Lennon. And it really comes back to the definition of a vendor.
Wait, we weren't going to go there.
Yeah, we
Tyler.
weren't going to go there because there is no official NERC definition of a vendor. And this has been played out for years. I think when SIP 13 came into play, which third parties are considered vendors and which ones aren't. I think where the ERO ultimately landed on that is, well, it's really, we're going to put it back on the entities to define what vendor means for them. And then as auditors, right, we are trying to make a judgment call. Is that a reasonable definition? And I'll tell you for the most part, what we've seen across all of our monitoring engagements is that entities have been writing very reasonable definitions of what they think a vendor is. And there's a lot of nuance to that. And yeah, let's talk afterwards, Lennon, but
I think you're going to have to convince your auditor that you've considered the risks appropriately, right? In order to define that term. And that is a wrap. I think it's lunchtime.
All right. Thank you, Molly, and everyone on the panel.